and ask, I would like to begin the conversation by asking for your reflections on the title for this evening, that prayer is both the lock and the key to the holidays. And I'm wondering, well, you know, I have a penchant for strange and unusual titles. And you might even suppose that I come up with a title before I come up with anything else that I'd like to share. And about half the time, that's probably true.
Yeah.
So it wasn't exactly true this time, but almost. I'm interested in knowing how you respond to the title, or how you respond, if you haven't thought about the title, for you to think about it now. In what way, in whatever way you spend your Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, with whatever kinds of liturgies that you have, public and private, how it is that prayer is a key to the holidays, and how is it that prayer is a lock that maybe keeps you out of the holiday. And I don't know whether, well, I'll get Sibby actually to call on folks. I'm seeing people, but seeing people in a fuzzy way. There's an interesting convergence of issues in my life right now, of which the cancer is maybe the least interesting.
Good. Oh, yes.
It's really true and ironic that COVID is, of course, a major framework, especially, and here I suppose the cancer enters into it because I am quite immunocompromised, and although I don't dwell on it and I'm not terrified in any particular way, still in all, one must be cautious, and I don't go out all that much for a long time. But there's a convergence of that issue with the ripening of two very wonderful, healthy cataracts, one in my left eye and one in my right eye. And there is, as you might have expected, surgery is scheduled. But in the last week, I would these cataracts have grown profusely. And so I'm really having a hard time. Indeed, I can't read my computer anymore, not even with the screen enabled in particular ways that do.
Oh my goodness.
So we just wrote away for some, purchased some readers that hopefully will help me. Cataract surgery is scheduled, but not for about a month. Anyway, it's making things a little bit more complicated. And the convergence of COVID and not being able to do the things that I do the best and that I love to do the most, like reading and writing, is it's a bit of a problem right now. So Sabina will probably call on folks, because I might not.
Lori wants to, she has her hand up.
Okay, we'll call on folks, and also probably we'll do some reading. Lori.
So, Steve, refuah shlema on your vision, among other
Thank
things.
you.
So I really liked the title, actually, of tonight. It really registered with me as soon as I saw it, because for me, not just at the high holidays, but in general, prayer is both the key and the lock. So for me, having a liturgy that we revisit and that becomes familiar and is sort of a structure and a container is a key for me, because I don't have to think of everything. Right? It's my version of the story of the child who can't read yet, who goes for Kol Nidre and doesn't know any of the prayers and recites the alphabet, or the Aleph Bet, and his elder tells him it's okay, God knows how to arrange the letters. So in that way, prayer is very much a key for me. And it is a lock because the holiday prayers are somewhat less familiar to me than Shabbat or the daily prayers. And so it's harder for me to follow in Hebrew, and I prefer to daven in Hebrew than English. So I don't always get through everything. So that's a challenge. And sometimes there are things about the prayers, the language or the concepts, or sometimes the gendered language that also really distract me from my kavanah, from my intention.
Right. So that prayer book can provide a thicket through which you have to fight. On the other hand, it can provide a framework within which you feel like you can open yourself up. And if all you're doing is reciting the letters, it's really, I shouldn't say all you're doing. You can do that with a kind of a fervor, and enter into it in a really good way. Maybe because of you feel like it's because the community is with you, because of the supportive community.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the place where the inclusion and davening with community is definitely a key and not a lock. So there's a difference certainly between individual or private prayer and communal prayer.
Uh-huh.
And the deep community, including those of us who mostly turn up that time of year, right? So there's a familiarity. And even if I was to daven at a community that's unfamiliar, the liturgy creates community for me. It creates connection.
Uh-huh. Thank you. That's a useful start. Anybody else?
I didn't think of lock as locking out, but rather locking in, like locked and loaded. That the key is to get inside of it. And then once I'm inside of it, hopefully it stays with me, or I feel it in a particular way. So that's the way I see the lock part.
Yeah. It occurred to me, the concluding prayer of Yom Kippur and Ne'ilah, I mean, it means the locking of the gates. So perhaps that's part of the idea throughout, that prayer provides key to the gates of repentance that we hopefully eventually get to go through, and then it locks after us, or at least our prayers are heard until it's locked until next year.
Working hard, yeah, until you get locked, you lock yourself or are locked inside, as it were. Another way of saying sealed, perhaps. Yeah. David?
Well, one example that comes to mind from High Holiday Liturgy, one of my favorites, is the fragment at the beginning of Unatana Tokef. The great shofar is sounded, the still small voice is heard. And I love the way that combines the revelation to Moses and all Israel, the whole community, with the revelation to the individual Elijah at Mount Horeb, which is Sinai. And what strikes me about that, we are both alone and in community all the time. I mean, you can be with a crowd and feel lonely, and you can be by yourself and feel the presence of so many loved ones and other people in your life. And so that prayer to me is a key, in a sense, of being present to both of those revelations. But it's also like a lock, because I feel betwixt and between. You know, it's like being in no man's land, and you kind of toggle back and forth. And it's both confusing and kind of wonderful to try to hold both of these elements together. So there's something, I guess, mystical to me about it. But I feel like, you know, it's as a swimmer, you know this, Steve, when you're in the water, I mean, the water keeps you up, but it also doesn't offer resistance. It's strange, you know, it's a different experience. And that's what that prayer experience with that verse reminds me of, between individual and community, being present to both, and but kind of being both, but also neither. Yeah, it's weird.
Well, yeah, thank you. And thank you for using the term mystical, which is a mystical term after all, isn't it?
And profound.
We give ourselves permission not to fully understand it. We're in it and we feel it from the inside out, but maybe we can't define it so much from the outside in. I wonder, you've now given yet another way of entering this issue of whether the or prayer as being key and lock, by giving us one phrase that seems to unlock lots of the liturgy for you, that is a key to a lot of the liturgy or a lot of the experience. And maybe others, maybe people would like to follow that path for a little bit. Some particular thing about the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur experience that infuses other things or liberates you for other things.
I'm of course thinking of, I have to get out of here. If you're stuck in shul, and that's like a lock, you have to be there. Well, you could decide not to be there, but you have decided to be there. So you have to deal with the locks in yourself and find the freedom, because you don't really want to leave. So it's challenging.
And thanks for the admission and for moving us into that little piece of the confusion. I don't really want to be here. On the other hand, I must be here. And I do want to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Something else, key or lock?
Well, I think it's very challenging in terms of language. What are words? And really the only way to get through it and into it and to the other side of it is through words.
Yeah.
Janet, did you want to say something? Looked like you.
The title reminded me of that concept in Hasidism of concealment and revealment, and letters, both concealing and revealing, which I really like. And during the high holidays, I feel like the prayers are there. Just as I think Muriel said, that you're there, but there's like this part of you that wants to leave, but there's also like this pathway that's going to carry you. I feel like the whole prayer process helps carry you and open up parts of me that I don't really necessarily want to open up, but feel safer in that whole container of a group to actually allow that revealing. But that most of the time I prefer to keep a lot of those parts of me, especially during the holidays, concealed, like the parts that I don't want, the shadow parts that I don't really want to acknowledge. So I very much like the title of having that concealment.
Oh, good. And thanks for bringing up from yet another angle of view the idea of community and how it is the community unlocks the process. Liturgy notwithstanding. Something else, someone else. Yeah. Who is that? Adina?
No, Arthur
Rachel.
had his hand up first though.
Oh, Arthur.
Where? Oh, hi, Arthur.
So congratulations to the teacher for just putting out the title of the lecture, and then the attendees just run the rest of the talk. So
That's what he was hoping.
I noticed that, but I am reminded of something that you talked about a few weeks ago, Steve, this question of, we painted the doors at the time of the 10 plagues to certify who was of the Hebrew nation, I guess. And you commented, are we putting it up to keep the Egyptians out? Or are we putting it up to keep ourselves in? And just reminds me of the same question. someone mentioned a few minutes ago, are we locked in or are we locked out?
Yeah, thank you. Are we locking ourselves in or are we locking somebody else out?
And I hadn't thought about this question about being in shul and not wanting to be here. I mean, I would never allow myself to think that.
But now that you are thinking it, does it seem like a strange and foreign notion?
No, it's not strange for certain times, but I allow myself to doze off, which is one way to sort of replenish and sort of, you know, gain my strength as long as I don't miss some of the important parts.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Rachel, did you want to say something?
I do. I'm just thinking of a different perspective on locks and keys. Caring for a building that has locks on every door and that has different levels of access. So there is a master key that unlocks all the doors in the building. And then there is a level of keys that one opens all of the internal and one opens all of the external. And then there's a level of keys that only opens all the classrooms. And there's like a tree and, you know, and then there are individual keys that only open particular doors. And, you know, the whole system is really complicated. And, you know, it was designed with the idea that only particular people had particular access to parts of the building. And over the years, it was so complicated to figure out who needed what access. Oh, wait, but they also need that closet key, but it's not on the same key as the classroom key. And then it was, you know what? Everybody gets all the access. And, you know, it's just much easier just to, you know, to not everybody had the master key, but internal and external, thinking that those are the two keys that are now duplicated. You either have external, internal, or both. Just thinking about it from a completely like physical perspective of.
As a good synagogue executive director would think. But it makes me wonder so what does that make you in this scenario, giving access to all of these things and determining who gets the access, and if they have the access, do they really get it all? You know, how does that look in the world of prayer? So you don't have to answer it. I'm just thinking about it.
No, it is interesting thinking about the person who's leading the service and theoretically can unlock all the doors, and building up the trust, or just deciding that it's easier to let everybody have access to as much as they can.
The person who can theoretically unlock all of the doors. This is the Shaliach Tzibur. In the words of, in the images of Reb Nachman of Bratslav, this is the Shaliach Tzibur, that you and you and you and each of us come in with our own set of good deeds, let's say, and those are keys to us because the liturgy is always prompting us to focus on good deeds, on the kinds of things that we have done that are edifying and that are communally valuable and that are personally valuable and that have moved us forward and promise to move us forward if we continue them and elaborate them in the future. But everyone's keys, as it were, everyone's deeds are different, but that the Shaliach Tzibur somehow opens up hospitality to all of those deeds and all of those keys and all of those ways. And he describes it in the following wonderful way, that each person's set of deeds describe a melody. Each person's deeds are their own. Each deed is its own little dense black dot, which is a note. And if you put together the pattern of these notes, you end up with your own nigun. You end up with your own melody, a melody that is uniquely yours. And it's your key, as it were, to the holidays, or to the freedom, to the access at its best and fullest, its most buoyant and exuberant part of the liturgy, and allows you even to tolerate those other parts that are more dense and difficult. But that the Shaliach Tzibur is the one who can get everybody's strings to resonate at the same time. That you are singing your nigun by rehearsing your own good deeds, and I am doing the same with mine. And the Shaliach Tzibur somehow is creating a circumstance whereby all of these individual keys can be used to spring the lock, as it were, on and for and with the community.
I'm just thinking about when you were talking about Shaliach Tzibur. So my friend Norman, who is on the screen here, when we used to live in the same city in Philadelphia, Norman would sing Ne'ilah at the end of Yom Kippur. And if you want to talk about unlocking something, you might have had whatever day you had. It's hard work being in the synagogue all day long. And comes Ne'ilah, and can I just make it a little bit more? And Norman's voice started singing the name of the song, Sharei Ne'ilah. Is that the right? Hane'ilah.
I don't know which one you're.
Yes, you do. The
Okay.
one at the end that Eric also sings now.
Il Nura
That's it.
Alila.
Thank you. And the way that Norman would sing it, this angelic way, would just open up every key or every lock and just fill you with this sense that now I know why I'm here. And there are other Shlichei Tziburs that can do that. And Eric is one of them in our synagogue. We're so fortunate to have him. But that's the way that, for me personally, that I remember just opening up. So thank you, Norman.
Yeah, what is the ear tuned? That sprung me last year. I think it's going to spring me again. I think it's going to spring me again this year. On the other hand, maybe we haven't paid that much attention to the locks. The locks might have to do in some ways with a deep question of whether prayer actually, on what level does it work? What level is it effective, both for me and for the community? It might be on the communal level. A lot of these prayers, a lot of these piyutim, that is to say liturgical poems, are dense and difficult. And our love of a melody might well tussle with our intellectual capacity or our cultural breadth to be able to take in these images, to see what they are and understand what they are. And they are like, I don't know, each one of these strange and unusual, highly wrought pieces is like a Sistine Chapel ceiling, You have to strain to see it, and from afar it looks very beautiful. But you wonder up close, would it be grotesque, or would I understand it, or would I feel comfortable with it? And I don't quite get its images. So it's a very, very difficult conflation, it seems to me, of familiarity and also unfamiliarity. And the unfamiliarity does not seem to shrink during the course of the year, because after the machzor is closed, we do not go back and study these piyutim, these liturgical poems. We don't spend any more time with them, and they may never be more than the words on the page, or the words that we sort of remember, the fragments that we remember from one year to the next. And I'm not saying that's totally bad, but it does make for a rather complicated relationship, I think, with the liturgy, and make us do a kind of contact tracing that goes from the liturgy itself to the effectiveness of it for us? What is it that feels, that purges, that makes us feel right, that makes us feel that we have fulfilled an obligation to ourselves as well as contributing to an obligation for the community? Whether prayer works at all, works altogether, is part of a fundamental issue that goes back to very early times, very early rabbinic literature. And maybe now, was there another hand?
No, but I unmuted, but I want to let you finish. I'm just spinning off into something maybe relevant, maybe not. Continue,
Well,
please.
Well, you want to take us there? Because we're going to go to the text in a second.
Oh, well, thank you. No, wow. So I mean, I just realized, I guess, closing the machzor at the end of Ne'ilah and then not opening it again for 11.5 months. Like, am I the only one that does that? Like, is that the standard in the community, that nobody ever looks at it again during? But I guess maybe on a rare occasion I've wanted to look at something that comes to me, but generally no, I close it and then it's over for 11.5 months. And I'm not proud of that, but you've just allowed me to out myself so maybe I'm not the only one that does that. I don't know. And then
Well,
you
I
said,
think-
is that bad? That was a dangling question.
I count myself in that number. So I don't know. I don't know that it's bad.
You got one vote already.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I wanted to look at advance, but just have this feeling that unless I was going to be a Shaliach Tzibur or something, I really did
Right.
not have the
Well-
incentive to.
Right, but that's what I was thinking, that rabbi, you are, with all respect, you're not a pulpit rabbi, but didn't you used to have to practice at times or think about it a few weeks ahead of time? Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just open it on Erev Rosh Hashanah and just wind up and go. I don't know.
In terms of investigating the meaning or learning something new about what this poet had in mind, no, I didn't do that. The machzor is the same as it was last year. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev said to someone in his community, someone who had requested permission to leave the Hasidic court to go home and to prepare for the holidays. The machzor is the same as it was last year. It's not the machzor that you have to prepare. It's you that you have to prepare. And you can best prepare yourself by staying here in community. Let the machzor be there on the page. When you open it up, it will be there. So this was, even Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev was thinking along those lines. So a fundamental issue about whether prayer, to what extent it actually works, and what is it that we are doing, and are we fighting uphill or trying to move someplace where in a certain sense we can't really go. That is that's a piece, that's the first piece that we're going to look at in this text that Jenna will put before us. And the next one is, the next piece is a famous story as retold by Shai Agnon. And we will get to that. So thank you in advance, Sabina, for reading it, because I can make out some of those letters, but my optometrist would be laughing at me by now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Did you say you wanted me to read it? Is that
No, I said Sabina. Just
Sabina?
the,
Okay.
yeah, the English. Thank you.
prayer is the lock and the key. Since the day that the temple was destroyed, the gates of prayer have been locked, as it is said. Even though I cry out, my prayer is blocked. But the gates of tears are not locked, as it said. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my pleading. Do not be silent at my tears.
All right. The gates of prayer are closed. from the time of the destruction of the temple. A fundamental issue. The temple was destroyed. People are praying for the temple not to be destroyed. The temple that God told David to tell Solomon to build. Solomon built this temple. This is this talismanic protection of the people of Israel. How could it possibly be destroyed? And now it's being destroyed. Is it possible that that the sweep of history is greater than the power of the God who said, build the temple? Don't destroy the temple. Don't ignore my prayer. And yet the temple is destroyed. What kind of resonance does that set up? What kind of attitude does that set up regarding prayer here in this little piece of ancient rabbinic literature? From the time of the destruction of the temple, the gates of prayer have been closed. Wow. And a citation from Lamentations, which is, of course, the as Jewish tradition sees it, and likely so, the eyewitness account of the destruction of the temple. Jeremiah's or whoever it was, but a very ancient, probably eyewitness testimony of the destruction of the temple. The gates of, yes. Yeah, Sarah.
Can you put your camera? Oh, there you go. Where'd she go?
She was there a minute ago.
Sarah, did you want to speak? And you have to mute or.
Or
Okay, there.
Oh, there
we
you
go.
are. Okay.
Okay, so I remember being taught over and over again that when this temple was destroyed, prayer replaced sacrifice. So how could the gates of prayer be closed if that was the replacement for sacrifice? So I'm really perplexed by the stance that this verse takes.
Yeah, extraordinary. Now, did this rabbinic teacher have to? Was he compelled to take this verse and to make it a centerpiece of theology? Since the time of the destruction of the temple, the gates of prayer have been closed. When somebody else is teaching, this is our hope. This is what's opening us up in a world that doesn't have sacrifice anymore. How do you reconcile these two things? Well, it seems clear that here we have two theologians who are arguing, if not in the same room, or at least arguing over the same issue, and they have different approaches to it. Prayer per se, the gates of prayer per se are closed. But how about the gates that remain open in this teaching? Adina, what do you think?
Well, what comes to mind is the prayer, Hannah's prayer. Hannah who cries and does not have words to her prayer, and that is in many ways has become in the tradition the epitome of what prayer is, and it's without words. And it's
I'm trying to clear the screen.
We're having multiple conversations here.
No, Sarah was just trying to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so Hannah's prayer, Hannah, the mother of Samuel, saying. Yeah.
And there are no words to what she, and it's silent. And here she's crying, and the crying is mentioned here. The tears are mentioned here as one of the keys to prayer, which originally was not understood and then was understood as she explained herself. But that's one key, and it's an important key that sometimes there's also Rachel who cries for her children. There are a few other instances where tears are what opens up the keys.
Thank you.
When something else is locked.
Yeah, yeah. This is definitely something worth exploring. And it's necessary on so many levels, not the least of which is the need for heroes who are females. And all of the haftarot for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have to do with females, with the women crying, have to do with that kind of breaking through that comes from crying. And even in the Torah reading, Hagar, who cries over Ishmael. So there are significant numbers of stories about crying. And the women seem to be the only ones who know how to do that or who are willing to do that. Is that something in a culture long-standing for us? It goes back even to the ancient world. Why is it that the men don't cry? Do we need more crying in shul? Kol b'Ramah nishma. A voice is heard in Ramah. It is Rachel weeping for her children. And she refuses to be comforted. So God responds because she refuses to be comforted. Thanks so much for that. Maybe we need more. It's really interesting to think that we might need something that's wordless, not fancy piyutim by Eliezer Kalir or Ben Kalonimos or anybody like that. Maybe we need wordless prayers. Maybe we need the crying. Maybe that's a key. And that the words themselves are Allah. We'll get to hear in another couple of weeks from Rivka Miriam, who has something extraordinary to say about that too. But why not start with ancient or earlier sources? How about that? How about the gates of prayer are closed, but the gates of tears are never closed? What do you think? Anybody else have a thought about it?
How do we know that the gates of tears are, what was the word you used? Are closed?
The gates of tears are not closed.
They're not closed.
Right.
Okay.
Jenna, can you put the text back up so we can look at it again? Thank you. I love this magic. So the gates of prayers have been locked. What is interesting to me is that it says, even though I cry out, my prayer is blocked.
Yeah.
And that crying out, the scream, that primal cry is one of the things that does open it. But in this case, according to the Babylonian Talmud, that's not enough. It has to be the tears. It has to be real, getting down to your real emotional, that your primal emotional level.
Yeah, even though you might have taken that verse from Lamentations and the verse from Psalms and said, they're not all that different, really. All right, they're not all that different, but the teacher here is looking at them in a particular way and wants to see something particular. So even if the verses are not all that different, here's a teacher who wants to say there's something about scripted prayer and something about unscripted and emotionally driven prayer that comes, or outcry that comes in waves, that's heading in the same direction, with the second one having that efficacy and the first one not having efficacy.
Mm-hmm. This I think puts pressure because it's about sincerity. Yeah.
And even the slightest attention paid to how you push an adjective up against a noun and what shading you give the verb
Yes.
is a little bit too much attention.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. When I was growing up, the shul that I davened in, it was an Orthodox synagogue in San Francisco. The Shaliah Tzibor that my mother couldn't stand was the one who stood there and he prayed the prayers for the congregation, and he had a picture of his mother with him who had died.
Whoa.
And he would cry. And it was not trustworthy to my mother. He was using
Some kind of a cheat.
Crutch.
a ploy. Yeah. So that, I don't know. There's this there's a lot of high thinking about crying and and emotion, and whether it's true or not, and how can it ever really be true? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's another challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, Adina.
I think that there might be a progression, but if not, there's like synonyms, but I think it's a little bit of a progression between when it says, hear my prayer, and then hear my pleading, and then finally the tear. The tear has maybe a higher, it's more concentrated, or it's more, it opens up, it's the highest level. Let's say there's a tefillah, which is what we're used to. Then there's the pleading, shava, and then the prayer, then the tear. And I think it's very powerful that they're not necessarily synonyms, but it is the highest level of reaching something, reaching God.
Thanks.
And
Thanks.
Norman has something to say too. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that my mother often used, and at the edge of a terrible sadness, and it's a very peculiar phrase. In English, it's translated Chotch Schrei Gewalt. Chotch Schrei Gewalt. I should only have the ability to scream out my lungs and let them echo.
Wow.
The
So no
gates.
words. Yeah, and no words. Yeah.
And no words. Yes.
That sounds like a nice little vana to write into the Siddur before the Kiat Shofar. I love it. That's very powerful. It's very powerful. And while we're
I know Hunter wants to say something.
yeah.
But since I'm calling on people, I get to call on me first. It reminds me that one of the things that right before when we say the memorial service, Yizkor, there's a phrase that says, give me the gift of tears. To me, Yizkor is one of those things that it almost feels contrived, that I have to, that I'm going to spend that time remembering a loved one. And if I'm not quite there, if I haven't unlocked that yet, that phrase, give me the gift of tears, so that I can geschrei, I can do what I need to do and feel that emotion. So I think there are times when we're supposed to do it, or times when we should do it, but we want to feel like we can. So I like that. And Hunter wanted to, Hunter?
Well, when Adina spoke, it occurred to me that tears are nonverbal, and so they come from deep within.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's going to bring us to the next part of the text, which we should look at. A small piece, famous story that is transcribed here. I translated it from Agnon's work on the high holidays, the days of awe, Yamim Noraim. And it features the shofar, which we could say is the stylized cry of the people of Israel. This is everyone's crying come together in particular, in a particular way that is liturgical. There's a way of doing it. There is not an adjective pushed up against a noun or a verb with a certain shading to it, but there are lengths of tones and spacing and repetition. So it has some of the features of language and some not. An extraordinary thing in the shul where many of us daven, where the one of the ba'alei tekiah, one of the shofar blowers, has a voice that sounds very much like his shofar. I find that interesting. If you were to listen to the voice of the shofar and try to shape it into words, it might sound a whole lot like him. And that really the sound, the Sfas Emes, one of the great Hasidic masters of the late 19th, early 20th century, says to us, that is the, that's really the Gishtai, that's the message, and that Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Ishtanut Devarim. It's the beginning of the articulation of words. That before that, we don't have words articulated, we don't have them interrupted by teeth and tongue and alveolar ridge and other mouth parts, not mediated by vocal cords, just an endless flow. And then we start doing what we do, breaking them apart and articulating them as separate words. But before that, they are a flow. Well, the master key to heaven's door. What do you think, Sabina? Can you read for us?
Yeah. Once the Baal Shem Tov of blessed memory commanded Rabbi Ze'ev Kitzis of blessed memory to learn the deep meanings behind the names of the shofar blasts, for he would be the one who called the notes on Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Ze'ev learned the deep meanings and wrote them on a piece of paper, intending to look at them during the service. He put the paper in his robe next to his heart. When the shofar service came, he searched for the paper everywhere, but it was gone, and he did not know how to focus on the deep meanings. It saddened him, and with a broken heart, he sobbed the notes in a simple way without the deep meanings. Afterwards, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, "Behold, in the palace of the king, there are many rooms and halls with different keys for each and every door. But the master key is the axe with which it is possible to open all of the locks on all of the floors, on all the doors. Deep meanings are just like the keys. For each door, there's a different deep meaning, but the master key is the broken heart. When a person is truly heartbroken before the blessed name, that person can enter every door in the palace of the king, who is the king of all kings, the blessed Holy One. There you go, Rachel. That's your master key.
So many of the motifs that we have been mentioning, so many of the themes and streams that have come our way and in which we've been floating and paddling are right here. There is the sobbing. There is the sobbing that supplants even the highest, most rarefied mystical meaning. Here, the most primitive becomes the most eloquent, and the most eloquent and esoteric moves off beyond the horizon as though it were, in the end, almost nothing, dare I say it? Not to say that the mystical notes are absolutely nothing. This is on an esoteric level such that it needs to be learned and needs to be written down. And the Baal Shem Tov is certainly the one to teach it. You might think the world will be redeemed and the lock will be sprung, but it's not because of that the lock is actually sprung. It's because of the crying and the sobbing. Thoughts, reflections?
I love the violence of the master key is the axe. I just love that an axe opens all doors. And violence isn't the right word, but the I don't know. That's the best word I can think of. But
Yeah.
the axe holds just stands
Power.
out.
Do you like power?
Yes.
And it is about the power of what seems to be the most powerless. And maybe it's a metaphor for Israel, actually. You know, as weak as Israel sometimes appears, it may have the most power in terms of relating to God, let's say, or in some other ways. But you know, to turn a weakness into a strength, it has a beauty to it, and I guess a comfort to downtrodden people.
The power of the tears, power of the axe. Thank you for that. I think that's that's beautiful. Even violence is an interesting word. It gets our attention. It's splintering. There is something splintering here.
Earth shattering.
There's something door shattering.
Door shattering.
Something door shattering about it. And in fact, Tkiya, Shavarim, and Teruah, the two words Shavarim and Teruah, they have to do with breaking and shattering. Shavarim, it means to break. Shever, lishbor, means to break. And ra'ah, resh ayin means to shiver something to pieces. That it's rickety and weak and can be shivered to pieces. So these two interior notes, what did the sages have in mind when they said, this is what we will call these notes? You don't have shavarim appearing in the Torah, and you don't have the values of the notes, how long they're supposed to be, and you don't have the order of them or the numbers of time they needed to be repeated. All of this is part of the rabbinic revolution, as it were. And the Shavarim and Teruah, these two broken notes, these shattering, shivering notes, these axe door splitting notes come between, they're sandwiched between a tekiah. There has to be a tekiah at the beginning of each line and a tekiah at the end of each line. And tekiah means basically to tack it in place. In other words, they have to come from someplace that's solid in order to be able to get to someplace that's broken, in order to end with someplace that's solid. And that's just the way we have to do things. Maybe we have to go to our most stable place before we can have the courage or the strength to go to some place that's more rickety.
Mhm. Mhm.
Here's the Baal Shem Tov who says, no, you must concentrate on these notes. It's really interesting to see historically, these are real people, the Baal Shem Tov and his Gabbai, Reb Ze'ev, Kitzis. And when the Baal Shem Tov moved to town, Reb Ze'ev was not among his supporters. He was won over, but bit by bit. And now he's trying to become more the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem says, look, you're the Gabbai here. I'm going to blow the shofar myself. And I want you to call these notes, but you need to be equipped with all of this. Did he really need to be equipped with all of that? Or was it the only way that this very, I don't know, fastidious, punctilious Reb Ze'ev could get beyond those names, is to try to learn them and then not be able to find it. I must say, just as we conclude here, that I've long suspected that the Baal Shem Tov stole that piece of paper from him at the last minute. I can't prove it, but it's as good a story as any other, that in order to deprive him of the names of those notes to which he could have referred in order to say, well, this in worlds above has the resonance of this and this and this and this, and get more esoteric, to move him to a place where all he could do was cry. Because the great master, at a moment when everything could have come to its final conclusion, but final conclusion, with a blast of the shofar that would open up the heavens, he was unable to deliver because he didn't have the notes. But in fact, it was because he didn't have the notes and because the doors were all locked that they really all opened up. Well, I think we'll continue the conversation next time and stay with the theme, a couple of other modern expressions of, well, trust in prayers, or expressions about the problematic of what the tefillah is. So we'll put a bookmark in the conversation for now and look forward to continuing next time. Tell your friends and neighbors. It'll be fun.
Bring their axe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Steve.
everybody.
Nice to